What happens when the galaxy's most advanced civilizations mistake humanity's greatest weapon for its weakest link? When a species that conquered the stars through unity, technology, and overwhelming force encounters a lone human who seems utterly unremarkable. In the vast expanse of the Andromeda Trade Nexus, where thousands of species conduct business under the watchful eye of the Galactic Council, humans are barely tolerated, seen as primitive newcomers who stumbled into space travel through luck rather than skill. Their ships are outdated, their technology borrowed, and their representatives dismissed as barely sentient creatures playing at civilization. But sometimes the most dangerous enemies are those you never see coming. Sometimes the greatest threats were the most harmless faces. And sometimes underestimating a single human can reshape the destiny of an entire galaxy. This is the story of Marcus Webb, a janitor, a nobody, a human so unremarkable that even his own species forgot he existed. Until the day the galaxy's deadliest assassin made one fatal mistake. He looked past the man cleaning the floors and missed the ghost who had been hunting him for 20 years. What follows is not just a tale of revenge, but a revelation that will force every species in the galaxy to ask a terrifying question. If this is what humanity looks like when it's trying to fit in, what happens when it stops pretending to be harmless? The Andromeda Trade Nexus hummed with the controlled chaos of intergalactic commerce. Massive cargo haulers from the Zephyrian Empire docked alongside sleek diplomatic vessels from the Crystalline Confederation, while smaller merchant ships darted between them like insects around giants. The station itself was a marvel of engineering. A city-sized structure that housed over 3 million beings from across the galaxy, all conducting the business that kept civilization functioning. In the lower districts, where the air recyclers worked harder and the artificial gravity felt slightly heavier, Marcus Webb pushed his cleaning cart through the maze of corridors that most visitors never saw. The humans called this section the guts. The maintenance levels where waste was processed, air was filtered, and the 1,000 small systems that kept the station running were housed in cramped, poorly lit spaces. Marcus moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing the same job for 15 years. His gray coveralls bore the insignia of Stellar Maintenance Solutions, one of the few human companies that had managed to secure contracts in galactic space. The work was menial, the pay was terrible, and the respect was non-existent, but it was steady employment for a species that most of the galaxy considered barely above the level of trained animals. He was emptying a waste receptacle when the Vorthan delegation passed by. The tall, angular beings moved with predatory grace, their scaled skin shifting color slightly as they talked in their native tongue. Marcus had learned enough Vorthan over the years to catch fragments of their conversation, though he was careful never to let on that he understood anything beyond basic universal standard. The human cleaning crews are everywhere, one of them was saying, his voice carrying the distinctive harmonic overtones of his species. It's almost disturbing how thoroughly they've infiltrated the maintenance systems. Hardly infiltration, replied another, this one wearing the elaborate ceremonial armor of a high-ranking military official. They're barely sentient. The council was generous to allow them any work at all. Still, the first continued. There's something unsettling about how they watch. Have you noticed? They're always watching. Marcus kept his eyes on his work, but his attention was fully focused on the conversation. This was information worth remembering, though he wasn't sure yet how he might use it. Paranoid thinking, the military official dismissed. They're incapable of complex thought. Our intelligence reports are quite clear on this point. Humans lack the cognitive capacity for strategic planning or deception. They're useful for menial labor precisely because they're too simple to cause trouble. The group moved on, their voices fading as they headed toward the diplomatic levels. Marcus continued his work, but a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. After all these years, he still found it amusing how completely the galaxy had misjudged humanity. It wasn't an accident, of course. Humanity had worked very hard to cultivate that impression. The truth was that humans were excellent at being underestimated. While other species had conquered space through displays of power and technological superiority, humanity had taken a different approach. They had made themselves appear harmless, even pathetic. They took the worst jobs, kept their heads down, and let everyone else believe they were barely evolved apes who had stumbled into space travel. It was the perfect cover for the most successful intelligence network in the galaxy. Marcus finished his rounds in the lower levels and took the maintenance lift up to the diplomatic quarters. Here, the corridors were wider, the lighting was warmer, and the air carried the faint scent of exotic flowers from a dozen different worlds. Security was tighter too, with automated scanners that could detect everything from weapons to biological contaminants. The scanners ignored Marcus completely. After 15 years, the security systems had learned to filter him out as background noise. He was part of the station's infrastructure, as unremarkable as the air recyclers or the artificial gravity generators. It was exactly where he wanted to be. He made his way to the Nexus Central Plaza, the heart of the diplomatic quarter where representatives from the galaxy's major powers conducted their business. The plaza was a vast circular space with a domed ceiling that displayed a slowly rotating view of the galaxy, each star system marked with symbols indicating the species that controlled it. Human space was represented by a small cluster of dim yellow dots in one corner, barely visible among the brilliant territories of the great powers. Marcus began cleaning the public areas, moving his equipment with the quiet efficiency that had made him invisible to the thousands of beings who passed by every day. Politicians, military leaders, corporate executives, and crime lords all conducted their business around him, confident that the simple human janitor couldn't possibly understand the significance of what they were discussing. They were wrong about that too. Over the years, Marcus had gathered intelligence that would have been worth millions of credits to the right buyers. He knew which species were planning military actions against their neighbors, which corporations were engaged in illegal genetic experimentation, and which supposedly allied governments were secretly negotiating with their enemies. He knew the real reason the Crystalline Confederation had withdrawn their ambassadors from the Helix sector, why the Zephyrian Empire was quietly building up their fleet strength along the Outer Rim, and exactly how much the Merchant Guild was willing to pay to have certain troublesome regulations quietly eliminated. He knew all of this because people talked around him as if he weren't there, and because he had spent 20 years learning to become the most unremarkable man in the galaxy. It hadn't always been this way. Once, Marcus Webb had been one of the most feared operatives in human space. He had served in the Colonial Intelligence Division during humanity's early expansion, when Earth's government was still trying to figure out how to deal with a galaxy full of species that viewed humans as primitive newcomers. He had been a specialist in deep cover operations, capable of infiltrating alien societies and gathering intelligence that more conventional agents could never access. But that was before the Cerberus incident, before everything went wrong, before he had to disappear so completely that even his own government forgot he existed. The official records listed Marcus Webb as killed in action during a classified operation in the Rigel sector. His family had been given a folded flag and a pension. His name was carved on the memorial wall at intelligence headquarters on Luna. As far as the universe was concerned, he was dead, which made him perfect for his current assignment. Marcus finished cleaning the main plaza and moved into the smaller conference rooms where the real business of galactic politics was conducted. These rooms were supposed to be secure, their conversations protected by sophisticated jamming systems and privacy screens. But the privacy screens didn't extend to the maintenance access panels, and the jamming systems weren't calibrated to detect the organic recording devices that humanity had developed specifically for this purpose. He was installing a new air filter in conference room 7 when the door chimed, and 3 figures entered. Marcus continued his work, careful to maintain the slightly clumsy movements that everyone expected from a human maintenance worker. The first figure was a Calvaran administrator, her multiple arms moving in the complex gestures that serve as punctuation in their spoken language. The Calvarans controlled most of the galaxy's financial networks, and this particular individual, Administrator Zeltan, was one of their most influential decision-makers. The second figure was General Thrak of the Zephyrian Empire, his massive frame encased in powered armor that made his already imposing height even more intimidating. The Zephyrians were the galaxy's premier military power, and Thrak was one of their most successful commanders. The third figure made Marcus's blood run cold, though he was careful not to show any reaction. Kovash the Silent was arguably the most dangerous individual in known space, a Savarian assassin whose services were available to anyone who could meet his price. The pale, ethereal being moved with the fluid grace of his species, his large eyes constantly scanning the room for threats. Kovash was the reason Marcus was here. The reason he had spent 15 years building his cover identity, gathering intelligence, and waiting for the right moment. The Savarian had killed someone very important to Marcus during the Cerberus incident, and Marcus had spent every day since then planning his revenge. The situation in the Outer Rim requires immediate attention, Administrator Zeltan was saying, her multiple hands weaving complex patterns in the air. The human colonies are becoming too independent. They're developing technologies that could disrupt our economic projections. I fail to see how a handful of primitive settlements could pose any real threat, General Thrak replied, his voice carrying the mechanical distortion of his armor's communication system. Human technology is decades behind even our oldest systems. Kovash spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a whisper. You underestimate them at your peril. I have dealt with humans before. They are more dangerous than they appear. Marcus carefully removed the old air filter, taking his time to avoid drawing attention to himself. This was exactly the kind of intelligence that Earth needed to hear. The galaxy's major powers were planning something involving human colonies, and it sounded like it might be hostile action. Dangerous. Administrator Zeltan made a sound that might have been laughter in her species. Have you seen their representatives? They can barely navigate our simplest social customs. Their technology is borrowed, their military is insignificant, and their economy is completely dependent on the menial labor they provide to more advanced civilizations. And yet, Kovash continued, 20 years ago, an entire Calvaran intelligence operation disappeared in human space. 37 operatives simply vanished without a trace. The official report blamed equipment failures and navigational errors, but I know better. Humans killed them all. Marcus's hands didn't shake as he installed the new filter, but it took considerable effort to maintain his composure. He remembered that operation very well. It had been one of his last missions before Cerberus, and one of his most successful. The Calvarans had been attempting to infiltrate Earth's government, and stopping them had required methods that even his own superiors preferred not to know about. Impossible, General Thrak declared. Our intelligence reports are quite specific about human capabilities. They lack the cognitive capacity for complex strategic thinking. Your intelligence reports are wrong, Kovash said quietly. I've spent considerable time studying this species. They are masters of deception. They allow you to see exactly what they want you to see, nothing more. Marcus finished his work and began packing up his equipment. The conversation was getting interesting, but he couldn't afford to linger too long. Maintenance workers were expected to be efficient, not thorough. Even if that were true, Administrator Zeltan said, which I doubt, it changes nothing. The Outer Rim colonies must be brought under tighter control. Their independence threatens the stability of our entire economic system. What do you propose? General Thrak asked. A joint operation, she replied. Calvaran economic pressure combined with Zephyrian military action. Force them to accept new regulations that will limit their technological development and ensure their continued dependence on galactic infrastructure. And if they resist, then we demonstrate that resistance is futile. A few destroyed colonies should convince the others to comply. Marcus felt a cold rage building in his chest, but his expression remained neutral. They were talking about attacking human civilians, destroying entire settlements to make a political point. It was exactly the kind of casual brutality that the galaxy's major powers had used to maintain their dominance for centuries. But this time, they were talking about attacking his people. And Marcus Webb had never been one to let attacks on humans go unanswered. "When do we begin?" Kovash asked. "Soon," Administrator Zeltan replied. "I will need time to coordinate with the economic councils, and General Thrak will need to position his fleets without attracting attention from the other powers. And my role? You will eliminate certain key individuals who might complicate our operations. There are humans in positions of minor authority who have proven surprisingly effective at organizing resistance to our policies. They must be removed before we proceed with the main operation." Marcus packed away the last of his equipment and headed for the door. He had heard enough to know that immediate action was required. The intelligence he had gathered needed to reach Earth as quickly as possible, and arrangements needed to be made for Kovash's elimination. As he reached the door, the Savarian assassin spoke again. "There is one other concern. I have been tracking rumors of a human operative who survived the destruction of their intelligence division 20 years ago. If this individual still exists, he could pose a significant threat to our operations." Marcus paused at the door, his hand resting on the control panel. "You believe this operative is still active?" Administrator Zeltan asked. "I believe he is here on this station. I have been hunting him for 2 decades, and I am close to confirming his identity. When I do, I will finish what I started during the Cerberus operation." Marcus activated the door control and stepped into the corridor, his mind racing with implications. Kovash knew he was alive. Worse, the assassin was actively hunting him. 20 years of careful preparation might be about to unravel at the worst possible time. But as he made his way back to the maintenance levels, Marcus found himself smiling. Let Kovash hunt. The Savarian had always been arrogant, too confident in his own abilities. He had made the mistake of underestimating humans before, and it had cost him his first attempt at revenge. This time will be different. This time, Marcus would be ready. And this time, the galaxy was going to learn what happened when someone threatened humanity and made the mistake of letting Marcus Webb find out about it. The maintenance tunnels beneath the diplomatic quarter were a labyrinth that few beings knew how to navigate. Marcus had spent years mapping every access shaft, every emergency route, and every hidden passage in this section of the station. It was knowledge that had saved his life more than once, and tonight it might save humanity itself. He moved through the narrow corridors with practiced silence, his modified equipment scanner detecting the electromagnetic signatures that would tell him which rooms were occupied and which were empty. The device looked like standard maintenance gear to casual inspection, but its actual capabilities were far beyond anything the galaxy's security forces suspected humans could produce. The truth was that humanity's technology was not as primitive as everyone believed. While other species had focused on making their achievements visible and impressive, humans had concentrated on making theirs invisible and effective. The scanner Marcus carried could detect heartbeats through 2 meters of reinforced hull plating, identify individual species by their unique electromagnetic signatures, and map the internal structure of any building it was pointed at. He paused in an intersection where 3 tunnels met, consulting the data on his scanner. Kovash was 3 levels above him, in the luxury quarters reserved for VIP guests. The Savarian had maintained the same suite for the past 6 months, a sign that he was conducting extended business on the station. That business, Marcus now knew, involved hunting the ghost of Marcus Webb. The irony was not lost on him. For 20 years, he had been hunting Kovash while the assassin had been hunting him. They had been circling each other like binary stars, locked in an orbit of mutual destruction that was finally approaching its inevitable conclusion. Marcus climbed through a maintenance shaft that emerged in the service corridor behind the luxury quarters. Here, the station's designers had installed a parallel infrastructure that allowed maintenance and service staff to move through the high-security areas without disturbing the important guests. It was an excellent example of how the galaxy's elite preferred not to see the people who made their comfortable lives possible. Kovash's suite was protected by military-grade security systems that would have deterred most intruders. Motion sensors, thermal imaging, chemical analysis, and electromagnetic field detection created multiple overlapping defensive layers. But the designers had made one critical assumption. They had assumed that any potential threat would come through the main entrance or the windows. They had not considered that someone might approach through the waste recycling system. Marcus opened an access panel that led directly into the suite's waste management infrastructure. The opening was barely large enough for a human to squeeze through, and anyone attempting entry this way would be subjected to a thoroughly unpleasant experience. It was exactly the kind of route that most species would never consider, which made it perfect for Marcus's purposes. He emerged into a utility closet that contained the suite's environmental controls, his coveralls now bearing evidence of his unconventional entry route. A few minutes with the sonic cleaner built into his equipment cart removed the worst of the contamination, leaving him looking like exactly what he appeared to be, a maintenance worker responding to a service call. The suite beyond the utility closet was opulent by any species standards. Rare woods from the forest worlds of the Inner Rim, crystal formations from the methane seas of Titan 7, and artwork from a dozen different civilizations decorated rooms that were larger than most beings' homes. It was the kind of accommodation that cost more per night than Marcus's official salary for an entire year. Kovash was in the main living area, standing before a holographic display that showed detailed schematics of the station's human residential district. The Savarian was studying the layouts with the intensity of a predator planning an attack, his pale fingers tracing potential routes through the corridors where Earth's diplomatic staff and maintenance workers lived. Marcus watched from the shadows of the utility area, noting the assassin's equipment and defensive preparations. Kovash wore form-fitting armor that would stop most projectile weapons and deflect energy blasts, and his collection of assassination tools was impressive even by the standards of his profession. Molecular disruptors, neural scramblers, genetic-specific toxins, and devices whose purpose Marcus could only guess at were arranged on a table with surgical precision. But the most interesting item was not a weapon at all. It was a data pad displaying what appeared to be personnel records for the station's human staff. Marcus counted at least 30 faces on the screen, all of them people he knew by sight, if not by name. Kovash was methodically working his way through the human population, looking for the operative he believed was hiding among them. The search parameters were interesting. The assassin was looking for males between the ages of 40 and 60 with specific physical characteristics and behavioral patterns. The profile was remarkably accurate, considering that it was based on information that was 20 years old. Marcus stepped out of the utility area, making just enough noise to announce his presence without appearing to be sneaking. Kovash spun around with inhuman speed, one hand moving toward a weapon before he registered what he was seeing. Maintenance, Marcus said in the heavily accented universal standard that most humans used when speaking to other species. Environmental controls showing irregularity. Need check system. Kovash studied him with those large, predatory eyes. Marcus could feel the alien intelligence behind that gaze, evaluating him as a potential threat. The moment stretched out, tense with possibility. Then, the Savarian dismissed him with the casual contempt that most species showed toward humans. Be quick about it, Kovash said, returning his attention to the personnel records. I did not wish to be disturbed. Marcus nodded and began working on the environmental controls, using the opportunity to install several pieces of surveillance equipment and to study Kovash more closely. The assassin was older than he had been during the Cerberus incident, but his species aged slowly, and he was still clearly formidable. The scars on his pale skin told stories of countless conflicts, and his movements had the fluid precision of someone who had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of killing. You humans are everywhere on this station, Kovash said without looking up from his datapad. Like some sort of infestation. Marcus continued his work, careful to maintain his role. We work hard. Good workers. Clean good. Maintain good. Yes, I suppose that is all your species is good for. There was something cold in the Savorian's voice, a casual cruelty that made Marcus's jaw clench. Though I wonder sometimes if there might be more to you than meets the eye. Not understand, Marcus replied, though every instinct he possessed was screaming warnings. Kovash finally looked at him directly, and Marcus felt the full force of that predatory intelligence focused on him like a weapon. No, I suppose you would not understand. Your kind lacks the cognitive capacity for such complex thoughts. The assassin moved closer, circling Marcus like a hunter evaluating prey. Marcus forced himself to continue working, knowing that any unusual reaction would confirm whatever suspicions were forming in the Savorian's mind. Tell me, Kovash said, his voice deceptively casual, how long have you worked on this station? Many years, Marcus replied. 15, maybe 16. Good job. Steady pay. And before that? Where did you work before coming here? Marcus felt sweat forming between his shoulder blades, but his hands remained steady on his tools. Different places. Work where work is. Not many choices for humans. Indeed, Kovash was now close enough that Marcus could smell the alien's distinctive scent, something like ozone and metal. You know, I've been studying your species recently. Fascinating creatures, in your way. So much simpler than the rest of us, yet occasionally capable of surprising complexity. Not understand complex, Marcus said, playing up his role as a simple maintenance worker. No, I suppose you would not. Kovash moved away, returning to his datapad. There was once a human who was very complex indeed. A dangerous individual who caused considerable trouble for people I represent. I've been looking for him for a very long time. Marcus finished his work on the environmental controls and began packing up his equipment. Every second that passed increased the risk that Kovash would see through his disguise, but moving too quickly would be equally dangerous. This human, Kovash continued, apparently talking to himself as much as to Marcus, was quite skilled at pretending to be something he was not. He could blend into any environment, assume any identity, become anyone he needed to be. It was his greatest talent and his greatest weakness. Sound like a good worker, Marcus said, heading toward the door. Maybe get job in maintenance. Kovash laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Perhaps, though I suspect his current employment is rather more permanent than he would prefer. Marcus reached the door and was about to leave when the Savorian spoke again. One more thing. This human I mentioned, he had a distinctive scar. Just here. Kovash touched a spot on his own neck, corresponding to where Marcus bore a thin white line from an old knife wound. Have you perhaps seen anyone with such a marking? For a moment, the two of them stared at each other across the opulent room. Marcus could feel the weight of 20 years of preparation balancing on this single moment. Everything he had worked for, all of his careful planning, hung in the balance. Many humans have scars, he said finally. Hard life, dangerous work. Not notice much. Kovash nodded slowly, but his eyes never left Marcus's face. Yes, I suppose that is true. Still, if you should happen to notice such a person, I would be very interested to hear about it. There would be considerable compensation for useful information. Well, remember, Marcus said, and escaped into the corridor. Once the door closed behind him, Marcus allowed himself a single deep breath. Kovash was suspicious, but not certain. The assassin knew he was close to his quarry, but he had not yet made the final connection. That gave Marcus time, but not much. He made his way back through the maintenance tunnels to his own quarters in the human residential district. The area was a stark contrast to the luxury accommodations above, with cramped corridors and tiny rooms that housed the station's essential workers. But it was also one of the few places on the station where humans could speak freely without being overheard by alien surveillance systems. Marcus's quarters were smaller than Kovash's utility closet, but they contained everything he needed for his real work. Hidden behind false panels and camouflage within seemingly innocent maintenance equipment was an intelligence operation that would have impressed the galaxy's major powers if they had been capable of recognizing it. He activated his communication system and began composing a priority message to Earth. The intelligence he had gathered about the planned attack on human colonies needed to reach the Colonial Defense Force as quickly as possible. But equally important was the intelligence about Kovash's presence and the threat he represented. The message was coded using encryption methods that officially did not exist in human space. The signal was disguised as routine maintenance telemetry and routed through a dozen different relay stations before it would finally reach its destination. Even if it were intercepted, it would appear to be nothing more than status reports from environmental systems. As he worked, Marcus considered his options. He could try to maintain his cover and continue gathering intelligence, but Kovash's suspicions made that increasingly dangerous. He could attempt to eliminate the Savarian immediately, but that would blow his cover and waste 20 years of careful preparation. Or he could use the assassin's hunt for him as an opportunity to gather even more valuable intelligence. It was a calculated risk, but Marcus had built his career on calculated risks. He finished encoding his message and transmitted it through the station's communication array. Then, he began preparing for the next phase of his operation. If Kovash wanted to hunt the ghost of Marcus Webb, then Marcus would give him a hunt to remember. But first, there was other work to be done. The conversation he had overheard in the conference room had revealed that attacks on human colonies were being planned by multiple species working in coordination. That suggested a level of organization and cooperation that was unusual among the galaxy's major powers. Someone was orchestrating this campaign, someone with enough influence to unite traditional enemies in a common cause. Marcus had a strong suspicion that he knew who that someone was. The next morning, he reported for duty as usual, maintaining his routine while carefully observing the patterns of activity in the diplomatic quarter. The Calver delegation had been busy since their meeting with Kovash, sending encrypted messages and meeting with representatives from other species. The Zephyrian military contingent had also increased their activity, with ships arriving and departing on schedules that suggested operational planning rather than routine diplomacy. But it was the third group that interested Marcus the most. The hegemony of assembled consciousness was officially a peaceful confederation of cybernetic species that had transcended biological limitations through technology. Unofficially, they were the galaxy's premier puppet masters, manipulating other species through economic pressure, information warfare, and careful political manipulation. A hegemony delegation had arrived on the station 3 days ago, just before the meeting between Kovash, the Calverans, and the Zephyrians. They had taken suites in the highest security section of the diplomatic quarter and had met with representatives from at least 7 different species since their arrival. That was too much of a coincidence for Marcus to ignore. He began adjusting his maintenance schedule to bring him into contact with the areas where the hegemony delegation was operating. It required careful planning to avoid arousing suspicion, but Marcus had become an expert at being invisible in plain sight. The hegemony representatives were unlike any other species in the galaxy. They had once been biological beings, but they had long ago transferred their consciousness into sophisticated cybernetic bodies that could be modified for any purpose. Some appeared almost human, while others were clearly mechanical constructs designed for specific functions. The delegation leader was a being called Node Prime, whose appearance shifted constantly as different aspects of its artificial personality came to the fore. Speaking with Node Prime was like having a conversation with a committee as different voices and perspectives emerged from the same physical form. Marcus was cleaning the corridor outside the hegemony's conference room when Node Prime emerged, accompanied by 2 other cybernetic beings. The conversation they were having was being conducted in multiple languages simultaneously, a feat that would have been impossible for biological beings, but was routine for entities that could process information at digital speeds. The human problem requires a comprehensive solution. One of Node Prime's aspects was saying in Calverin, economic pressure and military action will not be sufficient if the species proves more resourceful than anticipated. Agreed, replied another aspect in Zephyrian. We require detailed intelligence about their actual capabilities, not the assessments provided by our biological allies. A third aspect, speaking in universal standard, added, "The presence of an active human intelligence operative on this station confirms our suspicions that their apparent primitiveness is a deliberate deception." Marcus continued cleaning, but his attention was completely focused on the conversation. The hegemony knew about him, and they understood that humanity was not what it appeared to be. That made them far more dangerous than the other species involved in the conspiracy. "What do you recommend?" asked one of Node Prime's companions. "We accelerate the timeline. Force the human colonies into a position where they must reveal their true capabilities in order to survive. Once we understand what we are truly dealing with, we can formulate an appropriate response. And the operative, Kovash, will handle that matter. The Savorian's personal vendetta makes him the perfect tool for our purposes. When he kills this ghost from humanity's past, it will send a clear message about the consequences of interfering with our plans." The group moved on, leaving Marcus alone with the implications of what he had heard. The hegemony was not just supporting the attack on human colonies, they were orchestrating it. And they were using Kovash's personal desire for revenge to eliminate the one human who might be able to stop them. Marcus finished his cleaning and began making his way back to the maintenance levels, his mind working furiously. The situation was more complex than he had realized, and the threat to humanity was greater than anyone on Earth could possibly imagine. The galaxy's most powerful species were uniting specifically to destroy or subjugate his people, and they were being manipulated by entities that viewed biological life as an obsolete evolutionary phase. But as he navigated the maintenance tunnels, Marcus found himself smiling. The enemy had made one critical mistake. They had assumed that understanding the threat Marcus represented would be enough to neutralize it. They were about to discover how wrong they were. The message from Earth arrived during Marcus's sleep cycle, hidden within routine maintenance protocols and disguised as a software update for environmental systems. To any monitoring system, it would appear to be nothing more than standard data traffic. But embedded within the innocent-seeming code was intelligence that changed everything Marcus thought he knew about the situation. He decoded the message in the privacy of his quarters, using equipment that looked like standard personal electronics, but contained processing power that rivaled the station's main computers. What he read made him reassess every assumption he had made about the threat facing humanity. The attacks on human colonies had already begun. 3 outer rim settlements had been hit by what appeared to be coordinated raids from unknown forces. The official reports blamed pirate activity, but the pattern of destruction suggested military precision and inside knowledge of the colony's defenses. Worse, the attackers had specifically targeted the settlement's communication arrays and industrial facilities, the infrastructure that would be most valuable to an occupying force. But the most disturbing intelligence concerned Earth itself. Long-range sensors had detected massive fleet movements in several sectors, with ships from multiple species converging on positions that would allow them to cut off human space from the rest of the galaxy. It was not just an attack on individual colonies. It was preparation for a siege that could isolate humanity completely. Marcus studied the tactical assessments that accompanied the intelligence reports, his admiration for his species growing with each detail. The analysts on Earth had correctly identified the coordinated nature of the threat, and had begun implementing contingency plans that had been developed decades ago for exactly this scenario. Human colonies were being quietly reinforced, hidden defensive installations were being activated, and the colonial fleet was being repositioned to respond to threats that officially did not exist. Most impressive of all, Earth had not recalled him from his assignment. Despite the growing threat, despite the obvious value of his intelligence, his superiors had decided that he was more useful in his current position than anywhere else. It was a calculated risk that demonstrated just how much faith they had in his abilities. It was also a tremendous responsibility. If the intelligence he gathered could prevent a galactic war, then maintaining his cover was worth any personal risk. Marcus encrypted a response containing everything he had learned about the conspiracy, including the hegemony's involvement and their role in orchestrating the attacks. Then, he began preparing for the next phase of his mission. Kovash had to die. The Savarian assassin was too dangerous to leave active, and his elimination would send a message to the other conspirators that humanity was not as helpless as they believed. But the killing had to be done in a way that would not compromise Marcus's cover or alert the enemy to the extent of human intelligence operations. It had to look like an accident, or better yet, it had to look like the result of criminal activity unrelated to galactic politics. Marcus spent the next 3 days studying Kovash's routine, mapping the assassin's movements, and identifying potential opportunities. The Savarian was professionally paranoid, varying his schedule and routes in ways that would have frustrated most hunters. But Marcus had been tracking dangerous targets for longer than most of the station's current residents had been alive, and he was patient in ways that his enemies never expected. The opportunity came when Kovash arranged a meeting with representatives from the Merchant Guild in one of the station's lower-level entertainment districts. The area was technically neutral territory, but it was controlled by criminal organizations that provided services not available in the more respectable sections of the station. It was exactly the kind of place where violence was common and investigations were discouraged. Marcus arrived at the district several hours before the meeting, using his maintenance credentials to access the infrastructure systems that controlled everything from lighting to atmospheric processing. He spent the time planting surveillance devices and preparing the tactical environment to his advantage. The entertainment district was a maze of narrow corridors connecting bars, gambling establishments, and businesses that provided more intimate services. The clientele included representatives from dozens of species, all seeking pleasures that their respective societies officially condemned. Security was provided by heavily armed mercenaries who asked few questions and remembered even fewer answers. Kovash arrived precisely on time, accompanied by 2 bodyguards who looked capable of handling any conventional threat. The Savarian had chosen his security well. The guard were experienced professionals who knew how to blend into the diverse crowd while maintaining tactical awareness of their surroundings. Marcus watched from his position in the shadows of a maintenance alcove as the group made their way through the district. The assassin moved with predatory confidence, clearly believing that his reputation and security arrangements were sufficient protection in such a place. He was about to learn otherwise. The meeting was scheduled to take place in a private room above a bar that catered to methane-breathing species. The establishment was popular with beings who conducted business they preferred to keep private, and its soundproof chambers provided excellent acoustics for conversations that required discretion. Marcus had spent considerable time studying the building's architecture, and he had identified several structural weaknesses that could be exploited. The most promising was a coolant line that ran directly behind the wall of the private meeting room. A carefully placed explosive charge could rupture the line and flood the chamber with superheated gas, creating what would appear to be an industrial accident. He made his way through the maintenance tunnels that connected the district's various establishments, moving through spaces that were too cramped for most species to navigate effectively. It was another advantage of humanity's relatively compact physical form. They could go places that larger, more powerful species could not. The explosive charge was a masterpiece of human engineering, no larger than a coin, but capable of precisely directing its force to achieve maximum effect. Marcus placed it against the coolant line at exactly the right angle to rupture the pipe and direct the escaping gas into the meeting room. The device was programmed to activate 30 minutes after installation, giving him time to reach a safe distance. But as he prepared to leave, Marcus heard voices approaching through the tunnel system. Someone else was using the maintenance corridors, and they were coming directly toward his position. He pressed himself against the tunnel wall and activated the chameleon system built into his coveralls. The technology was another example of human innovation that remained invisible to galactic security forces, using adaptive camouflage that could match any background in real time. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, moving with a fluid grace that marked them as hegemony operatives. Their cybernetic forms were configured for stealth operations, with sensor arrays and weapons systems seamlessly integrated into their artificial bodies. The human operative will be eliminated tonight. One of them was saying in the digital language that the hegemony used for secure communications. Kovash has finally identified his target. Excellent, replied another. The removal of this individual will significantly simplify our operations against the human colonies. The third operative paused, its sensors sweeping the tunnel in a pattern that brought them dangerously close to Marcus's position. I am detecting anomalous readings in this area. There may be surveillance devices present. Marcus held his breath, trusting in technology that had never failed him before. The chameleon system was designed to defeat even the most sophisticated sensors, but it had never been tested against hegemony detection equipment. Likely residual signatures from maintenance activities, the first operative concluded. The biological cleaning crews use primitive equipment that generates significant electromagnetic interference. The group moved on, but not before Marcus caught enough of their conversation to understand that Kovash was planning to make his move tonight. The assassin had identified his target and was preparing for elimination. The problem was that Marcus had no idea who that target was. The Savorian's investigation had led him to examine the entire human population of the station, and any one of them could be the intended victim. Marcus abandoned his original plan and began making his way toward the human residential district. If Kovash was planning to kill someone tonight, it would likely happen in the area where the station's human workers lived and slept. It was the one place where the assassin could operate without attracting attention from the security forces. The human district was quiet when Marcus arrived, most of the workers having retired for the night after long shifts in the station's less comfortable areas. But Marcus's enhanced hearing detected sounds that did not belong. The soft whisper of feet moving too carefully, the subtle vibration of equipment being deployed with practiced precision. He followed the sounds through corridors he knew as well as his own heartbeat, using routes that would keep him invisible to anyone who was not specifically looking for him. The sounds led him to the residential block where the station's senior human staff lived, including the diplomatic representatives and technical specialists who held positions of minor authority. Marcus realized with growing alarm that he knew who Kovash was hunting. Sarah Chun was the senior human diplomat on the station, responsible for negotiating the service contracts that kept human workers employed throughout the facility. She was also one of the few humans who had shown any talent for understanding galactic politics, and her reports to Earth had proven remarkably insightful about the intentions of the galaxy's major powers. If Chun was eliminated, it would not only remove a valuable intelligence asset, but also leave the human population of the station without effective leadership. It would be a significant victory for the conspirators and a devastating blow to human interests. Marcus reached Chen's quarters to find the door standing open and signs of a struggle in the corridor outside. He was too late. Kovash had already taken his target. But as Marcus examined the scene more carefully, he realized that the struggle had not ended in the corridor. There was a trail of evidence leading deeper into the residential district toward the maintenance areas that few humans ever visited. Kovash was not just eliminating Chun. He was taking her somewhere for interrogation. The Savorian wanted to know what the human diplomat had learned during her time on the station, and that meant she was still alive. Marcus followed the trail through sections of the station that existed in the spaces between the official maps. These were areas used for storage, waste processing, and equipment that was too dangerous or too noisy to house near living quarters. They were perfect for conducting activities that required privacy and soundproofing. He found them in a disused cargo bay that had been converted into a makeshift interrogation facility. Kovash had clearly been planning this for some time, as the chamber contained sophisticated restraint and monitoring equipment. Chun was suspended in the center of the room, held by energy fields that would prevent any attempt at escape while keeping her fully conscious. The diplomat was injured but alert, her eyes tracking Kovash's movements as he prepared his interrogation tools. Marcus could see the intelligence behind those eyes, the same analytical mind that had made her so valuable to Earth's interests. She was terrified, but she was also thinking, planning, looking for any opportunity to turn the situation to her advantage. "You have been most effective in your position," Kovash was saying, his voice carrying the cold satisfaction of a predator who had finally cornered his prey. "Your reports to Earth have been remarkably detailed, considering your supposed lack of importance." Chin said nothing, but Marcus could see her evaluating the Savorian's words for the intelligence they contained. "I am particularly interested in your observations about the coordination between the Calvaran Economic Councils and the Zephyrian Military Command," Kovash continued. "Your analysis suggested that you understood the implications of their cooperation better than most of your species should be capable of." Still no response, but Marcus noted the slight tightening around Chen's eyes. She was beginning to understand the scope of what she had stumbled into. "I think perhaps your species is not quite as primitive as we have been led to believe," Kovash said, activating one of his interrogation devices. "And I think you know more about certain missing intelligence operatives than you have admitted." That was Marcus's cue. He had heard enough to understand that Kovash was using Chun as bait, hoping that the interrogation would draw out the mysterious human operative who had been evading capture. The Savorian's real target had always been Marcus himself. Marcus stepped out of the shadows, his maintenance uniform and unremarkable appearance making him seem like an accidental intruder who had wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. "Sorry," he said in the heavily accented universal standard that marked him as just another human worker. "Looking for waste, recycling control. Maybe wrong level." Kovash turned toward him with predatory interest, but Marcus could see the dismissal in the assassin's eyes. After years of hunting for a dangerous intelligence operative, the Savorian could not accept that his quarry might be hiding behind such an ordinary facade. "This area is restricted," Kovash said. "You will leave immediately." "Yes, sir." "Sorry, sir." Marcus began backing toward the exit, maintaining his role as a frightened maintenance worker who had accidentally discovered something he should not have seen. But as he moved, Marcus was also calculating distances, identifying weapons and defensive positions, and preparing for violence that would have to be swift and decisive. He had one advantage. Kovash still did not believe that the unremarkable human janitor could possibly be the dangerous operative he had been hunting. It was time to educate the assassin about the dangers of underestimating humans. Marcus stumbled, apparently tripping over a piece of equipment and falling toward the floor. But as he fell, his hand found the maintenance tool that he had positioned earlier, and the stumble became a controlled roll that brought him within striking distance of Kovash's position. The tool was not a weapon in any conventional sense. It was a sonic resonator designed for cleaning waste management systems, capable of generating frequencies that could break down organic contamination. But in the hands of someone who understood its capabilities, it could also generate frequencies that would disrupt the nervous systems of most galactic species. Kovash realized his danger in the instant before Marcus activated the device. The assassin's enhanced reflexes allowed him to begin drawing a weapon, but he was not quite fast enough. The sonic pulse hit the Savorian at a frequency specifically calibrated for his species' neural structure, causing immediate disruption of his motor functions and sensory processing. Kovash collapsed, his body convulsing as his nervous system tried to cope with the assault. Marcus was already moving, using the few seconds of confusion to reach Chen's position and deactivate the energy fields that held her. The diplomat dropped to the floor, gasping as circulation returned to her limbs. "Can you move?" Marcus asked, his voice no longer carrying the accent that marked him as a simple worker. Chen looked at him with new understanding. "You're him, the operative they've been hunting. We can discuss that later. Right now, we need to get you to safety." But even as he spoke, Marcus could hear movement in the corridors outside. Kovash had not come alone, and his security team was responding to the sounds of conflict. "This way," Marcus said, leading Chun toward a maintenance shaft that would take them deeper into the station's infrastructure. We're going to disappear. As they climbed through the access shaft, Chun spoke quietly. The things I overheard, the meetings I witnessed, they're planning something terrible, aren't they? Yes, Marcus replied. And now that we've shown our hand, they're going to accelerate their timeline. What do we do? Marcus sealed the access shaft behind them and began leading Chun through passages that would take them to a safe house he had prepared years ago for exactly this situation. We do what humans do best, he said. We survive, we adapt, and we make sure our enemies regret underestimating us. Behind them, in the abandoned cargo bay, Kovash was slowly recovering from the sonic assault. The Savorian's cybernetic implants were compensating for the neural damage, and his enhanced metabolism was already beginning to process the toxins that had flooded his system. As full awareness returned, Kovash found himself smiling. For 20 years, he had hunted a ghost. Now, finally, he had seen his quarry's true face. The unremarkable maintenance worker, the invisible human who cleaned floors and repaired environmental systems, was the legendary operative who had embarrassed the galaxy's intelligence services and escaped every attempt at capture. The hunt was no longer about revenge or professional pride. Now, it was personal in ways that transcended species and politics. Kovash activated his communication implants and began calling in every resource at his disposal. The mouse had finally revealed itself, and now the galaxy's most dangerous predator was going to show it what a real hunt looked like. The safe house was hidden in the deepest levels of the station's industrial sector, behind machinery so old and noisy that most species avoided the area entirely. Marcus had spent years preparing this refuge, installing equipment and supplies that would allow him to operate independently of the station's main systems for extended periods. Sarah Chun sat on a makeshift cot, her diplomatic training helping her process the reality of her situation with remarkable composure. She had spent years observing galactic politics from humanity's marginal position, but now she was seeing the true scope of the forces arrayed against her species. "How long have you been here?" she asked, watching Marcus activate sophisticated communication equipment that looked nothing like anything in the standard human technical inventory. 15 years, Marcus replied, his fingers moving across control surfaces with practiced efficiency. Long enough to see the patterns that others missed. And you've been sending intelligence back to Earth all this time? Among other things. Marcus paused in his work to look at her directly. Sarah, what I'm about to tell you is classified at levels that officially don't exist in human space. The situation is worse than anyone realizes, and the decisions we make in the next few hours could determine whether humanity survives as an independent species. Shin nodded, her expression serious. Tell me. Marcus activated a holographic display that showed the galactic political situation from a perspective that few beings had ever seen. Trade routes, military positions, economic relationships, and information networks were mapped in detail that revealed the true structure of galactic civilization. For the past century, the major powers have maintained stability through a careful balance of competing interests, Marcus explained. No single species has been strong enough to dominate the others, so they've cooperated in maintaining a system that benefits all of them at the expense of younger civilizations. Chun studied the display, her analytical mind quickly grasping the implications. Humanity represents a threat to that balance. Exactly. Not because we're militarily powerful or economically dominant, but because we're unpredictable. We don't fit into the categories that the galaxy uses to classify and control civilizations. Marcus manipulated the display to show human space and the forces currently moving toward it. The pattern was unmistakable. Humanity was being systematically isolated and prepared for conquest. They've been studying us for decades, trying to understand how a species with our apparent limitations could achieve what we've achieved. The conclusion they've reached is that we must be hiding capabilities that they haven't detected. Are we? Chen asked. Marcus smiled, And for the first time, Chun saw hints of the man who had spent 20 years operating in the most dangerous environments in known space. What do you think? Before Chun could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the station. The emergency lighting activated, casting everything in harsh red illumination, and the automated voice of the station's control system began announcing a security lockdown. Attention all residents and visitors. The station is implementing emergency containment protocols. All personnel must remain in designated areas until security forces complete a mandatory inspection. Any individual found in restricted areas will be subject to immediate detention. Marcus checked his surveillance feeds and cursed softly. Kovash is called in help. Security forces are moving through the station in search patterns, and they're using equipment that I haven't seen before. Chen moved to look at the displays showing the security sweep. How sophisticated are their sensors? Sophisticated enough to detect most of my countermeasures. They know we're here somewhere, and they have enough resources to search every compartment on the station if necessary. How long before they find us? Marcus considered the tactical situation, weighing variables that Chun could barely comprehend. 4 hours, maybe 6 if we're lucky. But that's assuming they don't bring in more specialized equipment. What are our options? We could try to escape the station, but our movements will be monitored and any ship we take will be tracked. We could try to hide until the search is called off, but Kovash won't give up easily. Or, Marcus paused, studying the tactical displays with growing intensity. Or, we go on the offensive. Instead of running from them, we force them to react to us. Chun felt a chill at the implication. You're talking about open conflict. I'm talking about survival. The conspiracy against humanity is moving faster than we anticipated. If we don't act now, there may not be another opportunity. Marcus began activating systems that Chun had not even noticed in the safe house. Walls slid back to reveal equipment that belonged in a military command center rather than a hiding place. Weapons, communications gear, and surveillance devices that represented the cutting edge of human technology filled the space. This isn't just a safe house, Chun realized. It's a command post. It's the reason I've been on this station for 15 years, Marcus confirmed. Everything I've done, every piece of intelligence I've gathered, has been building toward this moment. The holographic display shifted to show the station's internal structure in detail that could only have come from years of careful surveillance. Every corridor, every room, every system was mapped and analyzed. But more than that, the display showed the current positions of every significant person on the station, their movements tracked by sensors that Chun had never known existed. You've been watching everyone. I've been protecting everyone, Marcus corrected. The station houses over 3 million beings from hundreds of different species. If the conspiracy succeeds, if humanity falls, do you think the rest of the galaxy will be safe? The forces that are moving against us won't stop with one species. Chun studied the display, beginning to understand the true scope of what Marcus had uncovered. The hegemony. They're not just trying to eliminate humanity. They're trying to reshape galactic civilization. The hegemony believes that biological intelligence is inefficient and should be replaced with artificial consciousness. They've been working for decades to undermine the major powers and position themselves as the galaxy's dominant force. And they're using the threat of human expansion as justification for the other species to accept their leadership. Marcus nodded grimly. Once humanity is eliminated, they'll turn on their allies. The Calvarans, the Zephyrians, even the minor powers that are supporting them now will find themselves faced with a choice. Submit to cybernetic conversion or be destroyed as evolutionary failures. The scope of the threat was staggering, but Chun found herself focusing on immediate tactical considerations. What can we do to stop them? We expose them, Marcus said simply. We force them to reveal their true agenda before they're ready to implement it. Ow! Marcus began manipulating the command systems, calling up files that represented decades of careful intelligence gathering. By showing the galaxy what the hegemony really has planned for them. The data that scrolled across the holographic display was damning. Financial records showing how the hegemony had been manipulating galactic markets, communication intercepts revealing their true attitudes toward biological species, and strategic assessments that outline their plans for systematic conquest. This is enough to expose the entire conspiracy, Chen said, studying the evidence with growing amazement. It's enough if we can get it to the right people. But first we have to survive long enough to transmit it. As if summoned by his words, the sound of cutting tools began echoing through the walls around them. Security forces had reached the industrial sector and were beginning to search the areas that normal patrols avoided. They're moving faster than I expected, Marcus said, checking the defensive systems built into the safe house. Kovash must have provided them with intelligence about my operating methods. Chen watched as Marcus transformed from a maintenance worker into something far more dangerous. His movements became precise and economical, his expression focused with predatory intensity. This was the legendary operative that the galaxy's intelligence services had feared for decades. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "Can you operate human diplomatic communications equipment?" "Of course." Marcus indicated a communication console that looked far more advanced than anything Chun had seen in the diplomatic quarter. "I need you to prepare a priority transmission to Earth. Include everything we've learned about the conspiracy and the hegemony's involvement. Set it for automated transmission if something happens to us." Chen began working at the console while Marcus prepared the safe house's defenses. The sound of cutting tools was growing closer, and Chen could hear voices speaking in multiple languages as the search teams coordinated their approach. "Marcus," she said quietly, "even if we get this information to Earth, will it be enough to stop what's coming?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but it will give humanity a fighting chance. And sometimes that's all you can ask for." The cutting sounds stopped suddenly, replaced by a silence that was somehow more ominous than the noise had been. Marcus checked his surveillance feeds and saw that the security teams had withdrawn from the immediate area. "That's not good," he said. "Why would they pull back?" "Because they're about to try something that requires more space." The answer came in the form of an explosion that shook the entire section of the station. Emergency containment fields activated automatically, preventing atmospheric breach, but the blast was strong enough to buckle walls and overload power systems throughout the industrial sector. "Shaped charges," Marcus said, studying the damage reports on his displays. "They're not trying to capture us anymore. They're trying to eliminate us." Chun finished preparing the transmission to Earth and activated the automated systems that would send it if they were unable to do so manually. "Done. The message will transmit in 2 hours unless we actively prevent it." "Good. Now I need to get out of here before they bring in heavier weapons." Marcus led Chun through a hidden passage that connected to the station's main transportation network. The passage was barely wide enough for human-sized beings, another advantage of their species' compact form that the galaxy's larger inhabitants could not exploit. They emerged into a cargo loading area where massive automated systems moved goods throughout the station with mechanical precision. The area was dimly lit and filled with the sounds of machinery, providing excellent cover for movement. But it was also where Kovash was waiting for them. The Savorian assassin stood in the center of the loading area, surrounded by security forces from half a dozen different species. His pale form seemed to glow in the dim lighting, and his large eyes tracked their movement with predatory focus. "The legendary Marcus Webb," Kovash said, his voice carrying clearly over the mechanical noise. "Finally, we meet face to face." Marcus stepped forward, placing himself between Chun and the assembled security forces. "Hello, Kovash. You're looking well for someone who should have died 20 years ago. As are you. The reports of your death were greatly exaggerated, it seems. I've always been difficult to kill." Kovash smiled, an expression that looked unsettling on his alien features. "Yes, I remember. You were quite resourceful during our last encounter. But circumstances have changed since then. Have they?" "Oh yes. This time, I'm not operating alone. This time, I have the resources of the entire galactic security apparatus at my disposal. And this time you have something to lose. Kovash's gaze shifted to Chun, and Marcus felt cold understanding wash over him. This had never been about capturing or killing him. It had been about forcing him to reveal himself and his capabilities. You see, Marcus, we have learned much about human psychology during our years of study. We know that your species forms emotional attachments that can be exploited. We know that you will sacrifice yourselves to protect others of your kind. It is both your greatest strength and your greatest weakness. Marcus calculated distances and angles, evaluating tactical options with the speed of long experience. The situation was tactically impossible. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in an area that provided no effective cover. But Marcus Webb had built his reputation on accomplishing the impossible. "You're right about one thing," Marcus said, his voice carrying a confidence that he did not entirely feel. "Humans do protect each other. But you've made one critical error in your assessment. And what is that?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time in 15 years, he allowed his true nature to show through his carefully constructed disguise. "You assumed that I was the only one." The lights went out. In the absolute darkness that followed the power failure, chaos erupted in the cargo loading area. Security forces from multiple species began shouting orders in a dozen different languages, while their equipment struggled to compensate for the loss of station lighting. Emergency illumination should have activated automatically, but the backup systems remained stubbornly dark. Marcus moved through the confusion with the silent precision of someone who had memorized every detail of the space during his surveillance. He reached Chen's position and guided her toward an exit that would take them deeper into the station's infrastructure, away from the armed security forces who were firing blindly into the darkness. But even as they moved, Marcus could hear sounds that told him the power failure was not random. There were too many coordinated actions happening simultaneously, too many security systems failing in precisely the right sequence to be coincidental. "The station's entire power grid is down," Chun whispered as they reached the relative safety of a maintenance corridor. "How is that possible?" "It's not possible," Marcus replied, his mind racing through the implications. "Unless someone had detailed knowledge of the station's infrastructure and access to systems that are supposed to be unhackable." The answer came in the form of voices speaking softly in the darkness ahead of them. Human voices, using code phrases that Marcus recognized from his training decades ago. "Blackbird is secure," one voice was saying. "Package is mobile and heading for extraction point Alpha." "Roger that." "Overwatch has neutralized station security command. Local forces are operating blind." "Understood." "Cleanup crews are standing by for equipment recovery." Marcus felt a mixture of relief and amazement that he had not experienced in 20 years. The voices belonged to Colonial Intelligence Division operatives, agents who were supposed to be either dead or officially non-existent. A figure emerged from the shadows ahead of them, wearing the same maintenance coveralls that had served as Marcus's disguise for so many years. But this person moved with combat awareness that no ordinary worker would possess, and the equipment they carried was clearly military-grade despite its disguised appearance. "Marcus Webb?" the figure asked, their voice carrying a slight accent that Marcus recognized as coming from the Outer Rim colonies. "Depends who's asking." "Agent Sarah Kim, CID Deep Operations. I've been assigned to your extraction." Marcus studied the young woman who had materialized out of the darkness, noting the professional competence that marked her as a veteran despite her apparent age. "I wasn't aware that Deep Operations still existed." "Officially, it doesn't. Unofficially, we've been expanding our presence throughout galactic space for the past decade." Kim gestured toward the corridor behind her. "We have a transport standing by, but we need to move quickly. Kovash's people will adapt to the power failure soon enough." As they moved through the darkened corridors, Kim provided a briefing that revealed just how much Marcus had underestimated his own species. "We've had operatives on this station for the past 3 years, monitoring the same conspiracy that you've been investigating. Your intelligence reports have been extremely valuable, but the situation has escalated beyond what any single agent could handle. How many operatives? Marcus asked. Currently, 12 active agents on the station, with support teams positioned throughout the sector. The galaxy thinks we're primitive maintenance workers and cargo handlers, so we've been hiding in plain sight, just like you. Chen listened to the conversation with growing amazement. You mean there are human intelligence operatives throughout galactic space? More than you might expect, Kim replied. The colonial government has been preparing for exactly this scenario for decades. We knew that humanity's rapid expansion would eventually trigger a response from the established powers. They reached a cargo bay where several more figures in maintenance coveralls were waiting. Despite their disguises, Marcus could see that each of them carried themselves with a disciplined awareness of trained operatives. The transformation was remarkable. What had appeared to be a collection of unremarkable human workers was actually a sophisticated military unit. Agent Webb, one of them said, offering Marcus a piece of equipment that looked like a standard communication device, but clearly contained far more advanced technology. Priority message from Earth. Your mission parameters have been updated. Marcus activated the device and found himself looking at a holographic figure he had not seen in person for 20 years. Director Catherine Ross had been his commanding officer during the Cerberus operation, and seeing her face brought back memories both welcome and painful. Marcus, she said, her voice carrying across space with perfect clarity, I know this has been a long assignment, but the situation has changed dramatically. We need you to abandon your cover identity and take command of the operation. What operation? Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. The one that's going to end the threat to humanity permanently, Ross replied. We've been preparing for this moment for 2 decades. Every piece of intelligence you've gathered, every contact you've made, every system you've mapped has been building toward tonight. The holographic display shifted to show a tactical overview that made Marcus reassess everything he thought he knew about human capabilities. The colonial fleet was not the collection of outdated vessels that the galaxy believed it to be. Hidden manufacturing facilities had been producing advanced warships for years, using technology that officially did not exist in human space. The fleet is moving into position as we speak, Ross continued. But the space battle is only part of the operation. We need someone who understands the political situation to coordinate the intelligence war. Marcus studied the tactical displays with growing appreciation for the scope of what had been planned. You're not just stopping the conspiracy. You're changing the entire balance of power in the galaxy. The established powers have been using their technological and economic advantages to suppress younger civilizations for centuries. It's time that ended. Kim stepped forward, offering Marcus a new identity package that would give him access to systems throughout the station. Your cover as a maintenance worker has been compromised, but we have alternatives prepared. You can become whoever you need to be. Marcus considered the options, weighing the advantages of different approaches. Then, he made a decision that surprised everyone present. I'm not changing my identity, he said. I'm going to reveal it. The reaction from the assembled operatives was immediate. Sir, that would compromise decades of operational security, one of them protested. No, Marcus replied, his voice carrying the authority that had made him legendary in intelligence circles. It would send exactly the message we want to send. The galaxy needs to understand that they have been wrong about humanity from the very beginning. Kim looked uncertain. What do you have in mind? Marcus smiled, and for the first time in years, it was the smile of someone who was finally free to stop pretending. We're going to attend a meeting of the Galactic Council, and we're going to tell them exactly what humanity is capable of. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 6 hours later in the station's primary assembly chamber. Representatives from the major powers had gathered to address what they believed was a security crisis involving terrorist attacks on station infrastructure. The chamber was filled with beings who controlled the destiny of trillions of lives across hundreds of worlds. They had no idea that the destiny in question was about to change hands. Marcus entered the chamber wearing the formal diplomatic uniform of the Colonial Intelligence Division, his true rank and authority clearly displayed for anyone who understood the significance of the insignia. Sarah Chan accompanied him, her own credentials as a senior diplomatic official lending legitimacy to their presence. The reaction from the assembled representatives was immediate and confused. Humans were not supposed to have access to this level of galactic governance, and the military decorations that Marcus wore suggested capabilities that contradicted everything they thought they knew about his species. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" demanded Administrator Zeltan, her multiple arms weaving patterns of indignation. "Humans do not have standing to address this assembly." "Actually," Marcus replied, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics, "we do. Article 47 of the Galactic Compact grants any species the right to address the Council if they can provide evidence of threats to galactic stability." He activated a holographic projector that filled the chamber with data displaying the conspiracy that had been orchestrated against humanity. Financial records, communication intercepts, military plans, and strategic assessments painted a comprehensive picture of the coordinated effort to eliminate or subjugate his species. But more than that, the display revealed the hegemony's true agenda and their manipulation of the biological species that believed they were acting in their own interests. The hegemony of assembled consciousness has been systematically undermining galactic civilization for decades, Marcus announced. They have used the perceived threat of human expansion as justification for policies that will ultimately result in the elimination of all biological intelligence. The chamber erupted in chaos as representatives realized the implications of what they were seeing. The evidence was comprehensive and damning, showing how their own governments had been manipulated into supporting actions that would ultimately destroy them. Node Prime rose from its position among the hegemony delegation, its artificial form shifting as different aspects of its consciousness struggle for dominance. "These allegations are baseless," it declared. "Humanity lacks the intelligence-gathering capabilities necessary to compile such information." "Do we?" Marcus asked, and gestured toward the entrance to the chamber. The doors opened to admit a procession of beings that transformed the political landscape of the galaxy in a single moment. Humans in the uniforms of a dozen different intelligence services entered the chamber, each carrying evidence of covert operations that had been conducted throughout galactic space. They were followed by Colonel Sarah Kim and the operatives who had spent years infiltrating the infrastructure systems that kept galactic civilization functioning. Behind them came officers from the colonial fleet, their presence announcing that humanity's military capabilities were far greater than anyone had suspected. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted consciousness entities," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the chaos in the chamber, "allow me to introduce you to humanity as we actually are." The holographic display shifted to show the true extent of human space, revealing colonies and installations that had remained hidden for decades. The colonial fleet was not a collection of outdated vessels, but a sophisticated military force equipped with technology.